There we are. Hi, everybody. This is the Sales SOS podcast. I'm Liz Hyman, and you are here with your sales crew Renee Bigelow,
Hi.
Daryl Prell,
Good day, folks.
Mike Simmons.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about sales math. So if you're here with us live, we are going to do 4 episodes in these next 2 hours, and they're all going to be about sales math. So first, I think we're going to talk about basic sales math. What are you calculating? What are you looking for? In the second episode, we're going to talk about changing the math. What things can you do to change the math? Then we're going to talk about hiring and ramp time. What is the math around hiring new salespeople and how do you calculate that? And then we're going to talk about calculating ROI on activity, and we may switch these up, but this is what our topic is. So thanks for joining us for the Sales OS podcast, and I'm going to jump into our first episode. Hi, welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. I'm Liz Hyman, and we are here today with your crew, and we are talking about the sales. We're talking about sales issues and things that we can do to help you improve your sales. Today, we're going to specifically be talking about sales math. And you guys, I'm here with Renee Bigelow, Daryl Prell, and Mike Simmons, your crew today. And we're going to be talking today in this episode about sales math. So there's a lot of talk about, some people think it's 100 calls a day. That's what you got to do. The rest of it doesn't matter. And some people are talking about it doesn't matter how many calls you make. It just matters how good they are. But I think that the 4 of us are in agreement that there's a certain amount of sales math. Like if you are part of a company where you pick up the phone, you call somebody, and you close it every single time, please get on with us and share the magic, because we're just not seeing that. And so there's a certain amount of math that you need to be able to calculate. And one of the things I hear all of the time from CEOs and founders and investors is we can't calculate. We can't figure out. It's all just a wag. It's just a wild guess. Sorry, it's really a wild ass guess if you want to know the truth. And we just never know what's going to happen. So we have these forecasts, but we could be over, we could be under. It's just, they're really meaningless. So let's talk a little bit about what do we measure when we're measuring sales math? What is sales math? Maybe let's just start with the basics of what is sales math. So when I say that, and I know Mike is just dying to answer this question, so I'm throwing it right to him.
Yeah. Mike's got the whiteboard. I'm waiting for him to turn around and start going for it.
Mike, go do it. Show us about the stages and the math. Mike's going to start us off.
So the first thing I think, so how many people like math? Does anybody in this group like math? Okay. So we've got, and I like math. We've got and then we've got
it's fine.
Not really. Right. So why don't we like math?
Why don't we like math? Well, because it's hard. I can't even remember the order of operations, let alone how to do, division. And the problem with math, though, is that then you come up with a number and then people want to hold you to it. Accountability sucks with math. That's the issue. And then the last thing is it's subjective, right? It's like, well, those assumptions that your math is based on, they're bullshit.
No, Daryl, that's economics.
Oh, sorry.
That's economics.
There's math involved in economics too. So we'll go, yes, but you're right. You're spot on right.
So think about it.
Renee is a rock star at this stuff. She's going to have a different opinion.
So think about it. We complicate math. We add additional variables. We add, like Daryl was talking about, an order of operations. It's hard. It's hard and it's complicated. So let's simplify it. And let's just say, what is the math that we can use where A plus B equals C? Just simple addition.
Oh, how about A plus B equals approximately C?
A plus B equals?
Approximately.
Yeah. Or A plus B equals C sometimes.
sometimes.
Yeah, and you can get into that, but the reason why I was talking against approximately is if you're already starting to play with this thing called fuzzy math, then you get yourself into a situation where it's really hard to manage expectations and test assumptions around those expectations. So let's call something, create, say that A plus B equals C. And then when we test it in the operating environment, we can determine, does A plus B actually equal C? Do we need to add in another variable? Can we reduce a variable? Can we just go A equals C, like you were talking about earlier, which is every time I get on a call, I have a conversation and I close business because I'm amazing, which is not the case, right? The point that I was trying to make there is, if we can make it really simple, then we can test against it. And if we make it simple and we can test against it, then we can start to make better decisions around it. And a lot of people will struggle with it because they'll look at it and they'll say, I just don't get math. I don't do math. It looks complicated when a bunch of stuff goes up against that board. So that's my perspective. I don't know if that's helpful, or maybe I even overcomplicated it all in that discussion.
What are your thoughts, Renee?
I can add in. I've worked in both extremes, very large enterprise level, in major corporations, Fortune 500s, and I've worked at brand new startups, and the math is different. Math is math is math, except you're coming at them from exact opposite ends of the spectrum in those two scenarios. And I think, one is a lot wilder, one is more predictable, right? But the reality is that a whole bunch of people are somewhere in the middle, and that's where things get fuzzy, right? In a large enterprise organization, your math is, you have something fairly predictable. You have a lot of data for assumptions. You understand your capacity. You understand your goals. You understand your market and what that growth trajectory is probably going to look like. And you have a lot of data to back up what's happening in the market. At a startup, largely this is what I want to happen, right? This is the goal I have set out for myself, and it's not founded in data. It's this has to happen, right? Like, we've got to pay people, we've made promises to investors, like whatever those things are. So this has to happen, and the way you get to those maths is very different, right? On one end, on the startup end, you've got to put a number out there and you got to find a way to get to it. And largely on the enterprise side, you have to justify why you're building in numbers based on data. So I think when people land in the middle, which is where I spend a lot of my time now, which is like mid-market, right? That's where this gets really fuzzy, because you got a little bit of both happening, right? You've got these growth goals and scaling that you're trying to get to. So you're like, this is the number we need to hit in order for us to meet our overall goal. And then you have a certain amount of data that you're looking at and trying to make those assumptions. Does that help a little bit frame the conversation?
Yeah. Daryl, do you have something to add?
Give me an answer to build off a little bit what Renee said. So I'll drop back a step. So the question was, what is it? So this is not necessarily the right explanation, but I find I'm having this conversation a lot of the time with people who are still figuring out sales math in the marketing discipline, or even in the RevOps discipline. They know how to twiddle the bits in Salesforce.com or HubSpot, but they don't know what sales math is, which is, bad. So sales math is simply in its simplest form, what does the data show you are the activities you need to do, the volume of activities you need to do to physically get a sale. I'm making this really simple. And once you figure that out, then you can use that to start forecasting or modeling to see if you're going to hit your sales targets, like Renee was talking about. So simple math, sales math, very simple, would be if I make 100 phone calls, I'll have 10% connect rate. This is bullshit math, by the way, guys, because this isn't blind anymore. But you get the idea. 100 phone calls, I'm going to have 10 conversations. Of those 10 conversations, 3 will be qualified opportunities, and then 1 will result in a sale. And if my average selling price is $50,000, then that means if I want to hit a number of $250,000 for my quota, I need to make 5 times 50, 250,000, which means I need to make 500 calls theoretically to get, those 5 deals at $50,000 a piece. And then if I have 4 sales reps and they do the same math, then I'm going to make $1 million in revenue. Does that support our sales projections, et cetera, et cetera? That's the starting point. And to the point that was discussed earlier, you can make some assumptions because when you're starting out, especially as a beginner, you don't know what the sales math is because you don't have enough volume of activity. So you make just a straw man like I just did. And then to Mike's point, now you're actually going to go track the data and see how does that actually track. The reality is maybe 100 calls results in 1 qualified opportunity. So I need to make 300 calls to get 3 qualified opportunities to get 1 sale. So then you adjust your model accordingly. But that's sales math. So it's important to marketing because they need to know how much activity to do to bring in raw or marketing qualified leads, which will convert into sales qualified leads. And it's important to sales because they need to know how much activity they need to do. So when their sales manager is talking to your sales rep and they're saying you're not meeting your numbers, you're not hitting your quota, they're going to look at the sales math to say, well, are you doing enough activity? So that's the importance of it. And the idea is you share the assumptions, you share the conversions with everybody involved in revenues, and that becomes your baseline to talk with one another about, well, did they do enough phone calls? Did they do enough emails? Did they do enough social touches? And then you can get very granular. You can get into how long is the sales cycle or et cetera. What's my renewal? Then you get into all the SaaS metrics and it gets crazy. But how did I do it?
You did great. Let me kind of put a little bit more meat around that. So when I start thinking about sales math, I immediately think about the funnel. So I know you guys are sick of me talking about the funnel, but this is how it works. It's shaped like a funnel for a reason. And it's shaped like a funnel because you have to do a lot more prospecting than closing, right? So there's a basic sales math that somebody decided was a good starting place because it's in almost every single CRM in the same way when you first start out. And that is a 10-to-1 ratio. So for 10 prospecting activities, I get 1 lead, or 1 closed deal. So this may or may not have anything to do with your company, but it's a good place to start. So if I prospect 10 people, and I don't mean just cold calling, but actually research prospecting customers who could potentially be your client, maybe I get to talk to 7 of them. That would be really lucky. And then if I have 7 conversations, maybe 5 of those would be qualified and I would be ready to make a proposal for them. And if 5 of them I create a proposal for, maybe 2 of them will say, yes, that's what I want in this period of time. Let's do it. And if I'm lucky, both of them close. But we all know that even after they say yes, it doesn't necessarily close. So I always assume 2 in closing and 1 in closed. So if that's the basic sales math for the sales part of the funnel, 2 things come out of that. One is if I'm 10 timesing that 1, then when I get up to marketing qualified leads, how much do I need to multiply that? And if I am going up to just touches or interactions on the website or meeting people at conferences, how much do I need to multiply that number? So for that 1, there may be 1,000 interactions out there, which sounds like that's really scary math. And if you don't understand that the math can be that big, then you're not necessarily investing enough in the top of the funnel to get there. Mike, you're smiling. What are you thinking?
I used to do it that way.
How do you do it now? But like I said, that's kind of like the basic standard that comes in your Salesforce or your HubSpot, right?
Yeah. So you asked how I do it now. I focus on 2 numbers when starting to figure out what the math is inside an organization, specifically from a sales perspective, because that's where I'll focus on this stuff. The 2 numbers I care about more than anything else are pipeline created and pipeline developed. That's it. Don't worry about anything beyond that, because everybody has a different set of activity conversion metrics. We're all different. If I'm reaching out directly to somebody, the response is going to be a little bit different than if my son Sean is reaching out to somebody, or somebody new to a sales role is reaching out. But the two numbers I care about most are pipeline created, so opportunities, deals, whatever language you want to use that indicates that, hey, I've got a live one here. There might be an opportunity for us to potentially do business with each other. And then pipeline develop. How does it move through each of those stages? And in the past, we've talked about those stages. So you can go back and listen to that episode. And heck, you could binge watch all of these episodes and get some amazing stuff. But those are the two numbers that I care about. And what I find is when we start talking too early about all of the other numbers, people get lost. Yeah. Things get complicated. People have opinions. Well, at my organization, this is what we use. Inside this CRM, this is what we use. This report that I read about this says this is what we should use. And it takes us away from the objective, which is let's make some freaking money. Like, let's actually develop pipeline up to the point that it turns into a sale. So those are my two numbers. And the only two numbers I care about up until the point that I start to be able to do something with the data and then work that other math backward. So I start with those two numbers. So that's how I do it now, to avoid a lot of the complicated stuff in some of the other areas. And some people, there are a lot of people who would disagree with me on this approach. Heck, three of them might be on this call. But anyway, so that's how I do it.
So yeah. I'll jump in only briefly, like I'm ever brief, and say, I agree with you, Mike, from a sales point of view. The problem with your approach as a marketer is that, and Renee's going, yeah, is that doesn't tell me anything as far as the outbound activity I need to do to generate pipeline for you to qualify.
Daryl, do your job. As a marketer, do your job. Like I trust that you're going to do your job. Yeah, Renee, I trust that you're going to do your job.
I'll add a third critical number to that. Not to get too complicated, but it leads to exactly what Daryl said. If I came into an organization very marketing immature, very sales mature, and that's kind of what you're describing, very sales mature, like these numbers matter, right? Like we've gotten this down and we'll figure out the rest. Like we've zeroed in, this matters. And that's very common. There's a lot of middle America and Main Street USA that is marketing immature and has been very sales or channel driven over time, right? And they're trying to figure this out. Number one missing metric that I see is how long is the customer journey and how long is the buyer's journey? So like you split that out into pre and post, right? And so if you don't know how long that is, if you haven't kind of figured out where you start conversations in the buyer's pyramid and kind of assigned a timeline throughout that buyer's pyramid, then you have no idea what that beginning number, what it's going to take to get from that beginning number to where you are with pipeline created, right? And eventually closed. Like Liz said, that closed won, closed lost, whatever. Like how long did it take to get there? You have to have that. And then I always add in, because I'm full stack, there's a lot more opportunity after the first close. So you need to understand that portion too. But understanding that timeline for your industry, your company, your team, your leads, those that's a critical number to me. Daryl, you.
Yeah, I'll just explain to those who are missing some profound power behind what Renee just said. Was, we often will do these assumptions. Well, what's your typical sales cycle? Okay, my typical sales cycle is 30 days. Once I've qualified them. So then on a quarterly basis, I have a brand new hire. If I give them 2 months to ramp up, then they'll be able to hit 1/3 of their quarterly number because they'll have 30 days that last month. Boom, we're good, no problem, go. But what Renee's saying is, no. That's the actual sales duration, that 30 days.
No, that's only part of the sales duration.
That's from starting.
But there's the whole point of we have to actually do the outreach, the marketing to them to actually identify and warm them up and get them exposed to us and willing to take your calls and your outreach because they've seen our brand 42 freaking times. and they've downloaded some content and everything else. So that's the whole buyer's journey. So people often will use sales math to do forecasting based on a sales duration, when the reality is, to Renee's point, it's not just the sales portion, it's the whole buyer's journey. And by the way, we won't even get to the buyer's journey, because the buyer's journey continues once they become a customer, and which is a whole different.
All the way.
Yeah.
Okay, so hang on one
That's how
second.
we go from a funnel to a flywheel, though.
That's
Yes.
great. Oh, Renee, you got to do that with us in a little bit. Okay, so hang on just a second, because if you are not with us on video and you're actually listening to this as a podcast, Mike has just pulled out the whiteboard and has started writing. And I'm going to go to him in just a second. But I want to go back before we do that to what Daryl just said. And typically when I go into a company, they will tell me our sales cycle is 3 months. And after working with them for a little while,
That comment. Sorry.
you
You never know their sales cycle. That's why she's laughing, just so you know. They'll just bullshit and say it's 3 months.
well, and it's 3 months from the time I write a proposal.
3 months to
the
close.
time that I start writing a proposal until it closes. But the sales cycle, forget the marketing cycle, forget the entire customer journey. That sales cycle, that having that first conversation, that having that first reaching out to a customer you already have about a proposal, something that you want to propose to them, that top of the funnel generally doesn't get measured. And so you don't know you're in trouble until way down the sales cycle. And so instead of saying, hey, I'm looking at, I'm looking at the entire sales cycle and it's 9 months. So we better make sure 9 months from now, we're going to hit our numbers, which means we need to look at the top of the funnel, not the top of the marketing funnel, but the top of the sales funnel, in order to figure out whether we're going to hit our number in 9 months or 12 months or 18 months, instead of just looking at the bottom of the funnel, which is the 3 months. And if you really want to know what's going to happen, then you've got to look at the top of the funnel also. And so that's why, Mike, I start having sales leaders look at all of these numbers so they can understand. I had a client one time who said, well, the top of the funnel is full, so we don't need to get any more leads until all that stuff is closed. So that's the other piece of looking at this. Is the stuff that's in the funnel that you're counting legitimate? Does it have the momentum that Mike was talking about, where you're actually moving it forward in the sales process? Because just because your funnel is full doesn't mean anything is going to close. So Mike, I pass it to you from there.
All right, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions.
Sure.
If, Renee, you could only report on 2 numbers from a marketing performance perspective in this kind of green area that you and Daryl were discussing. So this is the Liz started talking about this red area that I added, which is the top of the funnel. But in this period here, where someone becomes, maybe it starts where we know who they are. What are 2 numbers that you would track in here? If you could only track 2, that would be an indicator of health or performance. And Renee, you first, and then I'll go to Daryl.
Well, let Daryl go first, because I'm not 100%
Okay.
sure following
I'll
what
2
numbers.
the area is.
2 numbers, and Renee's going to have probably 2 different numbers. We marketers, we all measure different things.
This is why working with marketers is so hard, and why you've got to find experts like Daryl and Renee who know their stuff.
So for me, and I'll give you the answer, and then I'll explain why. For me, I want to know conversion rate by channel.
Okay.
And I want to know average deal size or sales price by channel.
Say that again. Conversion rate by channel.
Average deal size by channel. So while he's writing that down, let me explain. I want to know, in other words, what's my conversion rate? Again, I'll use very simple math. My pay per click converts at 1%. All right. So if I'm averaging a spend of $100,000 a month, I now know it's to do whatever volume of pay per click. it's got a 1% conversion rate. And then I want to know what the average deal size is. Well, I know that the pay-per-click deal size is $10,000. So now I know that at $100,000 spend, I'm going to have, I know only 1% of that will actually convert into a deal. And it's only going to be $10,000. So now I can start to assess my spend, and I can also forecast how much money I need to additionally spend, assuming a linear conversion rate to meet the revenue goals. So, and the second part there is that we may determine marketers get hit by the fact that they want us to measure everything, and everybody has an opinion, right? So we need to say, well, listen, I spent $50,000 on trade shows, but the average deal size is $50,000 versus pay-per-click. The average deal size is $10,000, right? So I can start to see my marketing math I need to do for my spend, my investment.
Yeah. And so, Daryl, I'm going to stop you there only because that's what I want to do in episode 4. Okay, I want to really dig into that because it's
that I care about.
I'll add, so I'll back it up just a teeny bit to say, if you're talking about from, we've collected them into our database, essentially, right? So they're now just in our database, all the way to, I think that's where sales conversation starts, is the blue area. Is that right? Okay, so we've collected their name into our database, all the way to a sales conversation starts. The two I probably want to know are, what is the conversion rate? How many did it take to get there, right? Essentially, if I'm just really high level. And the second would be, how many touches did it take to get there?
Cool. That's good. I like that one. Because one of the things you got to think about,
and that would also be time, like touches.
Where it's going. Touches equals time, which goes back to what, of course, myself and our host, our lovely host here, was just talking about, the whole duration of the time. And actually, Renee brought that up too. Time is huge.
Okay, Mike, walk us through it.
Educate us, doctor.
So, Liz, you had said something before. You said top of funnel. What was it that you were describing? What's that stage? So so on the unknown side of things, what's the thing that you, what
hang on a second.
I have to laugh. In the
I'm trying to put Mike in the center so everybody can see him, but he refuses to be on the big screen here.
I'm a diva. I'm a diva. I don't want to be on the big screen. I'm in the.
Sorry, if you're listening, we're trying to do that for the people who go watch it on YouTube so they can see the whiteboard larger. But
what Liz is trying to do is get me dizzy so that I pass out, and then everybody then she can bring this back into a valuable conversation. But so in that red area, what's a number? Just, and there are no wrong answers. What's a number that you think is important in this area to help understand what needs to happen here to lead into here to lead into here? So on that top of funnel, is there anything that comes to mind that you want to know?
Just to clarify, you're talking about awareness.
Because
this is before they hit our database.
Before they hit the database.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Do you want to I'll tell you, I would say reach and frequency, right?
Say that again.
Your reach in your market would be your top thing. How much have you reached, and what's the frequency that you've done it? I mean, that is, I will say this before somebody accuses me of being focused on ads, because that is an ad formula, like reach and frequency, but that should apply more than across ads, right? Like your formats are more than advertising.
So some people would be measuring how much activity is there on the website, how many pages do they go to, how long do they stay there. So that might be another thing that you measure if you do a lot of activity on your website. Just depends on how you do your top of the funnel work.
Yeah, I would say that falls into like your reach and frequency, right? Like you need to figure out all the different touch points of how you're reaching out how you're reaching people. What's that total universe look like? How many times are you touching them? Are they coming to you? Right. And then what does it take to do that to get them to enter your database?
Right. So thank you. What I attempted to do while we were talking is visualize the stages that folks go through. And to Liz's point, this typically will look like a funnel because not everybody from stage one hits the website, sees some of the other things, touches, impressions, any of that other kind of stuff. Not everyone who does that stuff will move into the next piece, which they convert into someone who's known. And not everybody who is known will convert into somebody that we're actually having a sales conversation with. And not everybody who we have a sales conversation will actually develop as they go through. The reason I asked for 2 numbers as we're going through this is because it gets people focused on really works towards simplifying something. A single set of numbers that we can actually start to build a plan on influencing. So just with this discussion, though, we went from A plus B equals C to A plus B plus C times D divided by whatever and equals stuff. And this is why this conversation is so important to have inside the business. It's so important to have across multiple functions inside the business. And it's very important to not get so beholden to your specific numbers and all of the cool things you can measure, because before you know it, you will create this rat's nest of stuff that looks like spaghetti rather than connected information that can help you move from point A to B. And I understand it's more complex than that. But even here, we just talked about marketing cycle length from a time, sales cycle length from a time, pipeline created, pipeline developed, conversion rates, touch points, reach, frequency. Those are all variables that we're adding in here. And every time you add a new variable, you create complexity. But you can simplify this by breaking it down into either this A portion or phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Don't try to cover all of it at once. And that's hopefully what you see when you take a look at the visualized version of this conversation. Hopefully that was helpful. You gave me enough time. Nobody kicked me out, so it must have been somewhat helpful, or at least you guys are too nice to me.
I will add, if you want to label them, some general terms that are fairly ubiquitous are awareness, consideration, decision. Right. So awareness, consideration, and decision making. Right. That those are sort of the phases that you would be mapping when you do map out your buyer's journey.
So what's really interesting about that is the buyer journey, right? That's what the buyer does. And while our sales funnel looks like this, their journey actually looks kind of the opposite way, because they're starting to figure out, what do I need to go find? How do I go about it? So,
Liz, I actually always describe, if you just for workshop purposes, for people to understand this, that you start with the buyer's pyramid and then flip that down into a funnel, and then you figure out how to turn that into a flywheel.
And this flywheel, we're going to talk about in a little bit in one of our next episodes, because it's a really important part of this math. So stick with us. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. I just want to wrap up this sales math thing that we're talking about that is so unclear and so difficult for people to understand. Mike's point is, measure what matters. Just because you can measure it doesn't mean you should, is one of the common sayings that we have in this world of math. The second thing is, figure out, as you're doing this, what are the numbers that matter to you as you're learning. So pick some numbers to measure. Start somewhere, pick something to measure, and then watch that and figure out, are those numbers telling you enough, or do you need something else in addition or something else instead? But figure out your math. And for me, while I love math, Mike's way of doing it, my way of sort of looking at the funnel help CEOs start to look at, what does this actually look like? How does this flow actually go? And so while you may not focus on all of those because you can't focus on everything, being able to see the full set of numbers sometimes gives you a better understanding of what's going on. So two different ways to approach it. But in any case, do the math, learn the math, revise the math until it really helps you figure out how to predict what's going to happen. And what I would say, if you need help with that, all of us are willing to have a conversation with you. So you can find all of us on LinkedIn and reach out and say, hey, I need some help doing this. And we'd love to help you.
Because of course we don't like talking about this.
No.
No. All right. Well, that wraps up our first episode of Sales Math. Thanks for joining us, and join us in our next episode when we are going to talk about, I think we're going to jump down to calculating ROI. So we'll see you there. Okay. Are you guys, I think we need to talk about ROI. Like, what are the different ways that you get leads, and what's that investment, and how do you measure it, which is what Daryl started to talk about. Are you okay if we go there and then talk about changing the math later?
Yeah, where does optimizing come in? Does that come in ROI? That's where I would generally talk about it. Is that what you
think we're going to talk about it when we talk about changing the math. Like, how do we really optimize? How do we do better? So thanks for those of you who are with us live. Thanks for joining our in-between conversation as we figure out what we're doing next. Okay, so we're going to talk about ROI, calculating the ROI on sales and marketing activity. You good with that?
Let's say hi to Ollie real quick. Hey, Ollie, thanks for joining us live and
Ollie
commenting.
is in the house. He says bottom left, but I'm assuming his individual screen must be inverse. And he means
I read it as a typo where he was wondering who the old guy at the bottom left was.
No. That would still be. I would still be right. That'd be you, Mike. Clearly. Hey, everything's backwards, so it's got to be. Got it.
I was just going to say our topics are very apropos for the time of year. I think there are a lot of conversations going on about the ROI of sales and marketing right now as people are setting budgets for next year.
Yeah, let's start with that. Let's just start out with that. So, you ready? Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. I'm Liz Hyman, and this is your Sales SOS podcast crew. Renee Bigelow.
Hi.
Daryl Prell. And Mike Simmons. And we are in our second episode of talking about sales math. And in this case, we're going to talk about ROI. So one of the ways that I think about the world is that activity without strategy is chaos. And we tend to think that in the world of sales and marketing, a lot of activity is better. Just do more activity. And Daryl's already laughing.
Never moved that, ever. No.
You've never heard that before?
Never heard it.
More is not always better, and more can be really hard, and more can actually make everything else worse. So as we're starting to think about our ROI, we really want to think about, how do we measure the return on investment on the activities that we're doing? And Renee, you started to say something in the break. Can you share your thoughts about measuring ROI and this time of year?
Oh, I mean, it's budget time. Some people are doing great this year, but a lot of people are not seeing the exact growth. I mean, I would say I don't see a gloom and doom, but a lot of people aren't seeing the growth that they projected based on what was happening in 2020 through 2022, right? In 2023, maybe they hit it, squeaked in, and 2024 is just a little bit harder, right? I think that's been pretty universal for a lot of companies. And so there's a lot of questions about what should we be cutting, what's not really cutting it anymore, what should we be adding, how are we going to get to these numbers? We got to do something different to get to these numbers. What are the things that make the cut? And I feel like that's happening. And then there's also a lot more scrutiny, I should probably say this, in hiring right now, right? If you're hiring extra headcount in sales and marketing, like, what does that ROI, and can you defend it? Because everybody's just being a little slower on hiring than they were in the past 5 years or so. So I think both of those, the activities and the hiring. somebody else, I'm sure, has lots of thoughts about this.
So hang on just a second, because we're going to talk about hiring in the next episode. We'll really talk about the ROI on hiring because it's super important. But Daryl, go ahead.
Yeah, this Renee touched on something about budgeting. This is huge. So this is what happens in 90% of the companies. This is not what should happen. I want to be clear on this. This is not what should happen, but this is what actually happens. And if you're still early in your career, you're going to listen to me. You're going to think I'm a little cynical. I'm just old, to Mike's point. The board is going to go to the CEO and say, we're not, or the investors, and say, we're not happy with the growth. We want 50% more growth. And the CEO will not have consulted with their team at all. They're worried about their job. And they're going to say, okay, yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we can do that. And they're giving the investors the happy answers they want to hear. And then the CEO is going to work with the head of finance, again, without talking to anybody else in the executive team, nobody in sales, nobody in RevOps, nobody in marketing. And they're going to work back and they're going to say, well, you know, if marketing can increase their conversion rate by 50%, then we can back into and sales can, of course, close 25% more, then we can back into that number. But that doesn't help us hit our actual margins we want to hit, because they want top line and they want margins. So we're going to reduce marketing's discretionary budget by 40%, and because we're going to improve our results. And they back into the number. And then they come down to you and they say, here's our proposed budget. If you do not know, as a leader in sales or marketing or any other disciplines owning or influencing revenue, your conversion rates, your ROI, you will never be able to push back. And in about a quarter and a half, you will start to feel the heat of poor performance. And in about 2 quarters, you're going to start to feel the heat about your job. In about 3 quarters, you're going to be put on warning, and then you may not make it to the next year, just so you know. And you'll be the sacrificial lamb, because it's not the CEO's fault that they backed into the number. It's clear that marketing or sales couldn't do the job. And that's why you have a constant flywheel, not a flywheel, a rotation of a person. That's why the CMO and the head of sales average tenure 18 months.
18 months.
So
not even enough time to change the trajectory of a company with an 18-month sales cycle.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So the other part of this is that while you as a CEO have made all of these decisions and cut the resources and reduced the number of salespeople and increased their sales goal in order to get their bonuses, they're going to start quitting. And guess what? Then we're going to talk about what we're going to talk about in the next section is how long it takes to bring on a new salesperson and make them profitable. So this
should always check Glassdoor before taking a job, just FYI.
Absolutely. So this is that wild ass guessing thing. And I've now cursed twice, Daryl, and you haven't cursed yet, nor have you, Mike. So could you?
Twice. So there we
go.
go.
Well, okay. So, but this is this wild ass guessing thing. We're going to increase 10%. We're going to increase 50%. We're going to some wild number pulled out of thin air because some investor or some other notion got you to think you could do it without ever measuring the resources required. So you can only have a return on investment if you make an investment. Wait, can I say that again?
Please.
Louder.
You can only have a return on investment if you make an investment. So if you cut your investment, your return on investment will decrease. So let's talk about how do you, Mike's smiling over here. What do you got for us, Mike?
I'm tired of the whining about this kind of stuff.
It's Renee's fault. Sorry.
What'd you say?
Renee's fault.
Daryl, I missed it. I cut across you.
No. I was teasing Renee. I was saying it's all Renee's fault. I'm throwing her under the bus.
No,
I'm throwing somebody else under the bus.
Well, and the reason why I say I'm tired about the whining is this problem will continue to persist until you.
Yes.
So it will continue to persist until you go in and lead.
Say it louder.
It will continue to persist up until the point or until you go in and lead. And you have to understand what that really means. And it's not leading by going back to the team and saying, these are the numbers, get out there, figure it out. We'll go make it work. I believe in you. Let's go and go forth and conquer. No, come to the table with the data. Come to the table with the questions. Come to the table with a perspective. Come to the table with a view of risk and an understanding of what needs to be true in order to hit those things. And when you have those kind of conversations inside the organization, things will start to shift and change. And if you don't have the ability to have those inside the organization, then rather than go battle away in Q1, start looking for a new job. Or do what we do and go help organizations work through this stuff because we're not employable. Well, at least I'm not employable. Go out there and look for a new job because you're in the wrong organization. If you give a shit about fixing this, go find an organization who gives a shit about fixing it. Don't sit there and waste time in organizations where you don't have that seat at the table, that discussion, that ability to have the discussion. And in order to have that seat at the table, you have to come in with a level of business acumen to support those discussions. So you guys got me off on a rant now twice, and we've only done 2 episodes, and I missed the last week. So, yeah, stop the whining, go in there, have conversations. And if you're not able to have those conversations, go get another job. Go find a place that you can, because there are leaders out there who care about your perspective. That's my view.
I'll add, I think the reality is, even if you have your numbers, that a decent percent of people are just going to get handed a number and say, do it this year, right? I think we're in one of those environments. It feels very much like, what we saw about a decade ago. We have to hit these numbers. Like, this is it, right? And it's good. That can be hard. And I could give you all the reasons why what we have as our resources and our capacity and our budget and team, whatever, and marketing means we can't do any more, right? But it doesn't matter. I'm going to get a number because we have to show some level of growth, right? What I genuinely hope for most people is that you can push an agenda of innovation at this point, right? Which is to get a Tiger team together across the whole spectrum, because you're going to need whatever product is for you. You're going to need your sales team. You're going to need your customer success. You're going to need your marketing. Like, you all have to be involved in figuring out what new math, to Liz's point, will get us there. Because if there's this jump and your numbers don't support it, like Daryl said, like if it's magic math, right? And it's just pulled out and assigned to you without the data point, then you have to come up with something that helps you get there. And it's going to be something new, more than likely. Like, because in most organizations, not all, but in most of these organizations, you've become pretty good machine on efficiency, right? Like, you've figured out a lot of these things. So it's going to take something oomph to get you to whatever that number is. And that takes a cooperative effort. I will say this is much easier if the CEO leads it, right? Like, but a team can do it together because you're all going to get the same pressure, right? Like, you can think it's going to fall on one or the other, but a team can do that too.
So let's dive into this concept of ROI. Let's put a little bit more, rubber to the road here. So I'm having a really hard time with these really creative, can't even talk. Anyway, all right. So how do you measure ROI? And for me, one of the things that we make a mistake when we're measuring ROI is we measure ROI for this year. Like, okay, if I do this conference, this is what I got out of it this year. And my experience is that if I do a conference this year, and I think not just about who bought what this year after that conference, but I actually look at the lifetime value of a client, the return on investment, for instance, on a conference, and probably a lot of other things, is much bigger in the second year and the third year, particularly if you have a business-to-business complex sale with a long-term relationship, than it is the first year. So as we're looking at how do we measure return on investment? How do we measure return on investment on a $100,000 investment in a trade show or on a campaign? that we say is free because we're just using email and social media. So it's absolutely free, Renee, as you know. Um,
Totally free.
it's totally free. Just do that and just do a lot of it. How do we measure this? So, Daryl, you started us down this path a little bit earlier in our last episode. How do we start really thinking about measuring ROI on our sales and marketing activity?
Okay, so I'll answer the question, but then I'll give a little additional context. The simplest aspect from a marketing point of view, and Renee is actually better at this than I am, so she will add color. Is you literally want to know, for every channel you use, could be email's a channel, could be events, could be pay-per-click, etc. Every channel you use, you need to know how much money you're spending, and you need to track how many of that results in actual qualified pipeline, however you define qualified. You can track it at the MQL level, track it at the SQL level, track it at, closed one, whatever. But you need to get consensus among all the players, just so we're all on the same page, sharing the same assumptions. Otherwise, if you don't, it'll bite you in the ass later on. So that way, you can physically say, if I spend $100,000 in trade shows, it'll result in $50,000 in new business. Probably, I'm making this up because we're going to get 2 sales at $25K each. Now you're looking at that, you're saying there's no ROI there. You lost 50,000. You spent 100, you earned 50, you lost 50. So where's the ROI? Whereas if I spent 100 and I generated $250,000 in sales, the ROI is very obvious, right? So I made more than I spent. Some channels will have a positive ROI that is very measurable. Other channels, trade shows often fall into this, content can often follow in this. Podcasts like this, I can't measure this ROI. It could be somebody today watching this podcast, and they're going to say, you know what? That Renee gal, she's smart as a whip. You should reach out to her. And they will reach out to Renee, and that will result in a new client for Renee. And she'll never know it came from this particular show. So she cannot measure the ROI and her investment on this show. That's what's called dark social, by the way. So you need to have, this is the context point. When you're measuring ROI as a marketer, you need to do your budgeting so you know how much money, so you can know how much, if I spend this much, I'll have this much conversion by channel. It'll result in this many sales. These are all the assumptions. You need to get consensus on those assumptions so you don't bite you in the ass later on, because later on they're going to say you're underperforming only because you have a disagreement on the assumptions. But you also need to negotiate up front, and this builds on what Renee said, on 2 things. One is certain investments will not have an ROI. And you have to do it often for branding, awareness, thought leadership purposes. Events is a great example. The other thing is you need to have a portion of your budget you hold back. Maybe it's 10%, which is for your innovation, which says, I'm going to use that to do experiments. And maybe I'll stumble across a new tactic I've never deployed before that has an awesome ROI, and I can then invest more money in there and augment my pipeline. So you can't measure me on that. Or maybe I'll lose money, but even then, if I lose money, I learned something. I learned that doesn't work, don't do it again, right? So ROI is 2 things. One, it's defining the return on your actual marketing spend and getting consensus on the assumptions around that. And second thing is, it's having a negotiation that not in the marketing world, not everything will have a positive ROI. And you need to get consensus on that. Renee,
Can I jump in on this? Because this one I'm super, super passionate about, and I preach a lot. One, over the last 10 years, we have gotten hooked on something I call attribution crack, right? It feels good to know where your money went and to know exactly what you got back for it. And that is attribution crack, right? Like we got this in digital channels where we could see more of what was leading to a sale, what was leading to prospects coming in, and we decided we were going to optimize for those things. And now we are paralyzed at making a decision without it. right? Now, I track all of those things, just like you said, Daryl. I track all those things. I need to know them to set my internal budget, to tweak things through like what we're doing and everything else. But that really should mostly stay inside the operating of a marketing department, right? Where you're trusting that your people are doing what they're supposed to be doing and they know what they're supposed to be doing. What you really want to look at is a much more universal metric for success. And one of the ones that I think is very important is, can you speed up sales velocity because leads are coming in better educated? And do they understand more about what you're doing, right? So if you can prove over the course of a year that you've impacted a number like that you're bringing in better leads and they're moving through more quickly because they understand what you're doing, that is a much better way of looking at ROI than, I mean, obviously, again, I will say this, your marketing team has to do this. They need to be able to pull the levers and push the buttons and do everything else in the same way that if you were a manufacturing facility, you would be with your supply chain or anything else, right? But that's not your critical numbers. Your critical numbers is what was the impact of the activities. And that's what we really need to be measuring ROI on. Now, again, ROAS, which is like a return on ad spend, things like that. Yeah, you're going to have to answer some of those things as a marketing team, but that's really internal marketing operations. Sorry, that's
the biggest picture. If you're a really good marketer, what you'll negotiate is you'll say, measure my ROI on my overall budget. If I have $1 million budget, let me manage and make the decisions on how everything's spent, and I'll figure all that crap out, and I'll move money from pot to pot. But you gave me $1 million. I should return you $2 million in either sales opportunities or revenue, etc. That's an ideal world. That way I can allocate my funds accordingly and apply the skills that I have.
Yeah, and you're going to have to defend that throughout time, right? Like, in sales will too, right? Like, you're going to have to defend that. You need to be ready to have those conversations, but they aren't your critical numbers.
So I want to jump over to Mike, because he's chomping at the bit here. But before I do, I want to say there's a when missing here. If I do a trade show now, when do I expect that return on investment? And that's really important. When companies say things to me like, well, we're not going to do any direct selling effort. We're just going to do, we're going to do content. And I need to have this much increase in sale in 6 months. And then I'm sort of like, wow, you have to understand how long content takes in order to return on the investment that you're making. You have to understand the sales cycle, but you also have to understand that a trade show, you might get some leads, you might get some business right away because they're ready to close, but you might not get some business for 18 or 20 months. So understanding that not everything returns immediately, it might not return in the same year. So as you're measuring that return on investment, understanding how long it's going to take is really important.
Liz, can I add
Yeah, go ahead, Renee.
context to that? Because I don't have the answer on this, because everyone will tell you I need a strong CFO for conversations like this, because finance is not my background. But essentially, the problem that I've identified with what you're talking about is we will accrue out an investment in a capital expense over time for the lifetime of that capital expense, and the value and the ROI gets accrued over a different number of years, right? That doesn't happen with operating expenses. Operating expenses land in the year. And in marketing, a lot of the foundational things that you have to do, like I'll just throw one out there that people say all the time. I need sales in 6 months. My pipeline, I need to have it built up by next, 6 months from now. Let's start SEO. And I'm like SEO is going to take a lot longer for that, right? Anyway, but they want to see it happen now because that's an operating expense for now. So I think that is one of our conundrums, is so much of this used to be 50 years ago a capital expense that you could figure out ROI over time. And now a lot of your operating expenses are that way. And I don't have the answers, but that's the problem I've sort of identified.
I will share a story to what you're saying, Liz. On multiple engagements where I've been involved, I've had CEOs say to me, you're only doing all this event and public speaking and webinars and podcasts and videos because you like it. I need to see the ROI on that. And the only way we can track the ROI, and this is a pet peeve of mine, is the famous Chris Walker. Let's have a drop down in the form that says, where did you hear about us? And the drop down is going to say, oh, at an event at the B2B Marketing Expo in London, England, whatever, right? And then the CEO will say, look it, nobody's saying that. And I'm saying, look it, again, to Renee's point, they may have seen us in a Google search. They may have seen us at an event. They may have watched a podcast. Just because they picked one, the other didn't influence it. So you get into this attribute crack conflict, which is what it is. You're 100% right that you have to set the expectation that the ROI may be months or years out. And the reason I know this to be true, not just a marketer speaking because they like to do it. By the way, when they say you like to do it, what they're really projecting is they don't like to do it. So they don't see the priority in it. So therefore, you must be messed up. You like to do it. Is every time I left those engagements within 3 months, the pipeline dried up. And all the sales reps would say, that's because we don't have anybody now evangelizing and keeping our name top of mind.
So when you get those little side notes from the salespeople,
Yeah.
like, I miss you.
Yeah. So that's why you really have to negotiate that some stuff can be measured, ROI, some stuff can't.
I don't know if it's an answer, but I've just started referring to these as growth investments. Yeah. Like you figure it out on the finance side. I'm not a finance genius, but these are growth investments, and it takes them. You have to invest to see growth.
Mike, what you got for us?
There are a couple of key themes that have come up throughout the conversation through this last 30 minutes or so. The importance of team. So don't fail alone. Don't get stuck managing your number by yourself and then reporting things on a couple of slides because those are going to make it into the board deck. And that's the only time that information gets shared. So work across the team. Leverage their experience. Like, I shouldn't be saying ROI because I'm not a finance person. Right? Like I have my own view of what my return on investment is based on the areas that I invest my time, my energy, and my resources. That could be, resources, money, time, energy, people, right? So work across your team. Make sure that in that work across the team that you're really clear around what your assumptions are and what their assumptions are, and write those down, document them. Because there will be a conversation that you have at some point in time where things are either working or things are not working, and you're going to have to go back in time in your Wayback Machine, your hot tub time machine, your DeLorean, whatever it is. But you want to go back and have that document that you can refer back to and say, as a team, when we were communicating these are the assumptions that we made that were going to yield a result or make a specific impact. So the fourth word I wrote up here was impact. Get aligned on what the impact is, your desired outcomes, your objectives are. Align across the team, leverage the resources. Everybody inside the organization who has an email address with the same domain on it should care, broadly speaking, about the same things, or at least things that roll up into the bigger things that the organization cares about. So those are just a couple of my takeaways from the conversation.
So I want to just wrap this up with what I do with my clients when we're talking about where are we going to put our lead generation investment, our lead generation efforts. And I like to talk about lead generation because that is sales and marketing. And because we have two marketing folks here, we've really been leaning into kind of what is marketing's role in lead generation. Sales also has a role in lead generation. I have my clients actually go through the process of saying, what are the things that we want to do for lead generation? Do we, lead generation within existing clients, lead generation for new clients? What are the things that we want to do, and list them out, and then sort of think about, well, this is our sales goal. How much money do we need to make on trade shows? And if we're going to do trade shows, which ones are we going to do? And how many people do we need to meet that are actually serious about what we're doing? And then calculate through how much does that really cost, not just going to the trade show and the travel and the food and the hotel, but all of marketing's time, all of sales time before, during, and after, right? How do we make sure that we calculate in a bunch of this stuff and then look at what's the annual return? Like what's the return I want in this year, but then what's the lifetime value of that? So if I get one client and they buy their first thing for $10,000, but over 5 years they're $1 million client, I've more than paid for that $100,000 trade show. So really thinking through what's the math for our efforts. What does it look like? If we are selling something that's recurring revenue, what is the lifetime value of that client? It's even easier to measure. So thinking through what's the process you're going to use to figure out what you need for a return on investment over what period of time. Don't just go, oh, well, let's go to trade shows and see if we can hit our $1 million number. You just can't do that. You have to really think through, what am I going to do? What's the return that I need? And what would that require in order to do it? And remember, in that, you can't measure everything. You know, as Daryl and Renee are saying, not everything is measurable. And if you don't put it into the CRM, like if you don't have an original lead source on every single opportunity, you will never calculate that opportunity to the original lead source. So how are you going to measure it? So that's sort of my wrap up of the practical side of what everybody's saying here about what needs to be done. So thanks, you guys. Any comments before we jump to our next subject?
I would just add, well, first of all, I can't wait to talk more about trade shows.
We'll do that. We are going to do that next year.
Yes, but I would add, really look for the commonalities. We spent the last episode talking about the entire buyer's journey and customer journey. Take a look at the activities across that whole journey that contributed the most. Right. I'm going to give one concrete example. Like if we're worried about just original source, that's, first touch attribution, last touch attribution. The truth is, a lot of what really matters happens in the middle of those. So looking for instance, did most of the people who closed last year download one particular thing that was very helpful? Did most of your leads that came after a trade show attend a webinar later? Right? Like then you can start piecing together what is impacting your customer and buyer's journey without this like first touch, last touch attribution crack, right? Like, and your team can say, I know every person I talked to mentioned this. I know they already knew this when I talked to them. These are points of data that contribute, that are different than cookie tracking data, right?
All right. Well, thanks you guys for your input on that. As our viewers, our listeners are heading into the new year, hopefully this discussion of return on investment will help them decide where to invest for sales. That wraps this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. Join us for our next episode, and I think we're going to talk about hiring and ramp time. Okay, you ready? Because I think that ties right into where we just were. So, welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. I'm Liz Hyman, and this is your Sales SOS podcast crew: Renee Bigelow, Daryl Prell, and Mike Simmons. And we have been talking about sales math, which, interestingly enough, math is not my favorite subject. And I am talking about sales math all the time. It's important. We need to know it and we need to understand it. I want to talk now with the team, with the crew, about hiring sales math, because I'm going to tell you a story of a client that I have. A year ago, almost today, they hired a head of sales. And over the course of the last year, they hired 3 salespeople. And this last week, they fired all of them. Their goal when they hired me to help them was to increase sales for divisions of companies they already have, but finding new divisions that they're not currently selling to, which you and I all know is a long sales process. So when we're hiring salespeople, if we don't understand ramp time, return, again, we're talking about return on investment. Like, how long does it take for a salesperson to be producing? I have another client I had the same conversation with last year. They invested a lot of money in sales, and 6 months later, they were angry because they had hired 6 people and they weren't paying for themselves yet in terms of the amount of extra revenue they were bringing in. So how do we understand this as CEOs, as leaders, as investors? How do we figure out what that looks like? How long does it take? What are the things that impact how long it takes for a salesperson to be delivering at the revenue level that we want them to be? I have just completely blank stares. If you're not on the video, they're all looking at me like, this is a tough one.
It's it's not useful to say this, but it depends, right? Like
Yes.
it depends on a number of different things, and unfortunately, people inside organizations make assumptions on what's going to happen. So they'll be like, you know what? I got 3 reps who each are generating $1.5 million a year. I want to grow the business from 4.5 million to 9 million year over year. I'm going to go ahead and plug in 3 new reps this year, and we're going to grow the business because the math just works. And they don't know what the math is. They don't know what is going to happen when you change the territories that those 3 reps are responsible for. They don't know how long it took those 3 reps to get to a point where they were consistently generating 1.5 million in sales. Some people get confused and talk about sales and revenue at the same time, and they're referring to 2 completely different things.
Can you explain that before you go?
No, because I'm not a CFO. Like, actually, here's the meathead version of sales versus revenue. Sale is the booking that happens. It's when something is closed won, when someone agrees to pay you for this software solution, this product, this service, this tangible thing. If I'm buying a cup like this and that exchange happens immediately and I pay for it immediately, the company will likely recognize that sale as revenue. That's my understanding. When you sell this cup as a software thing, and it's a monthly subscription to this cup, I can't recognize the revenue right away. I have to recognize that revenue in 1/12 increments over a 12-month period if it's an annual subscription. That is as deep as I can get in the difference between sales and revenue.
All right, so keep going with what you were saying. That's good enough.
So what I would do is I'd ask you to get your CFO involved. Again, don't fail alone. How do we recognize revenue as a business? And if they get frustrated with you asking the question, then talk to somebody else on their team. They probably will be really excited that someone on the sales or marketing side has an interest in what revenue is.
Right.
Right. So they'll help you and they'll work with you and they want to help you. So we make a lot of assumptions around A plus B equals C, or A times X equals B times X equals C times X, or will lead to those things. And that's where a lot of folks make mistakes, and you overhire. And I have overhired multiple times. I have underhired multiple times. These mistakes will continue to happen. And the thing that gets me in trouble most in each of those situations is when I try to hide a mistake or fail to continue to communicate how progress is being made, or progress if you're up where Daryl is.
I have 2 things I can contribute here, Liz. One, I always refer to, when I go into companies, I'm just going to make an analogy here between marketing, like a company, are they marketing ready, right? Like, and what I mean by, are you promotional ready, right? So I'll generally come in and the CEO will be mad. They've hired 3 agencies. None of them have done what they wanted. They're mad. They don't think marketing works, blah, blah, blah. Everybody's laughing because this is very, very typical. Well, the problem is they didn't do the work they needed to do to be ready to spend that money to see success. The analogy is I see that all the time on sales with a scenario like what you talked about. Is there a way for your sales team to come in and see success? Like, have you set them up for success? What does that onboarding look like? To Daryl's point, to Mike's point, how did you divide up territories? Are you just handing, the old days, hand them a phone book, right? Like, are you just saying, go do it?
Renee, what's a phone book?
I know I'm showing my age, but it's a good sales analogy, right? Here's Google, go find customers, or are you like putting them into a process or a system? Do you have the tech, the sales martech to support it? Do they understand what to do? Like all of those things. I see that one a lot, right? You bring in these people and you expect miracles, and yet you aren't setting it up and making that investment in what the operating side of that looks like. And the second point would be, well, I'm going to leave it at that one and see what Daryl has to say, because I think that one is probably one of the tops.
So when it comes to onboarding, my advice would be, and then I'll give I'll do what Mike says. I'll whine based on my real world experience afterwards, what I've seen done wrong. My advice would be to forecast their impact as conservatively as you possibly can. And if they can overachieve, that's delightful, because to Mike's point, you don't know how long it took the reps to get to their productivity and performance levels now, the training they've had, the years of experience they've had, yada, yada, yada. A new rep's not going to have any of that, because there is the onboarding process, right? How long to actually learn everything, get used to the systems, etc. Are they inheriting any pipeline or not? Likely they're not. Do they have to go and prospect themselves, which means they have to learn all the value props? So you're going to need another month or 2 or 3 for them to get comfortable with it and all the objections and everything else and the script, etc. So you need to really forecast, like, theoretically, this rep is not going to have any impact for at least 6 months. That's what you should.
And longer if it's a 12-month sales cycle or 18 months.
Exactly. You nailed it. Now, the reality is, this is where I whine. This is where the ball gets dropped on the whole onboarding process. I'll use Mike's example where I went and hired, say, 6 more reps. So maybe I've already got 6 reps and I'm going to hire 6 more reps. I think, well, that must mean that I will double my revenue generated. But you won't, because of 2 things. A, there's a ramp time, like we just talked, maybe 6 months. And then B, that not all 6 of those reps are going to work out. There will be some attrition, right? So you're not going to double. That's number one. The other mistake I see happen all the time is, okay, marketing's feeding my 6 reps. I'm going to hire 6 more reps and give marketing no additional money and expect that they can feed 12 reps now, double what they were feeding before on the same money. That's a mistake. They won't. And instead, all 12 will starve as opposed to 6 being adequately served. All right. Or they do give marketing some money and they think, well, if you've got 500,000 in budget, I'll double it to $1 million because I'm doubling my reps, because you should be linear in your results, marketing. But the reality is you won't be linear. You will likely convert less, because chances are you need to look at your actual addressable market that marketing can reach out to. And the addressable market may not be big enough to support 12, which means you can only maybe find an additional 25% more prospects that you're not touching, but you need to get 100% more. So therefore, there's no linear results. So onboarding needs to factor in the impact of marketing and the impact of their performance and their attrition and everything else. So people don't do that because that's hard. Goes back to what Mike says. Math is hard.
Hiring is hard. Onboarding is hard.
Hiring, holy shit.
A lot of people will talk about this onboarding process that'll help accelerate ramp, accelerate speed to impact, the time to value, the time to performance, however you want to look at it inside the organization. And they may or may not have that documented. They may or may not have leading indicators to help you assess whether or not the right progress is being made. And if they don't have that stuff at that point, they absolutely or most likely do not have that stuff built into their hiring process. They don't know what stages everybody goes through from the point that someone becomes aware of your organization to they're considering being a part of your organization to they're actually making a decision to be a part of your organization. And the process, whether you're working on bringing on internal customers, people who work inside your business, or external customers, people who pay you to provide a service, is the same. You're dealing with humans who move through each of these stages. And if you haven't taken the time to document that process out, then you're taking on a lot of risk that you might convert really high and get some of those people inside the organization, but then they're churn out because they're no longer the right fit, because they happen to be the enterprise sales leader at Oracle, and now they're going to play startup for a little bit, and they're just going to take all the stuff that they did with Oracle and apply it into your business. Why are you laughing, Daryl?
I've never seen that ever happen. Ever. Never
And
seen that.
what they do is they expect that they're going to have all these marketing resources and all these admin resources, and they're going to have this enablement team that's going to provide all of these things, and they have no idea how to build from 0 to 1. So have a hiring process that leads into your onboarding process, that leads into your success process inside the business. And you can design for this and learn, and not just go about it based on some book that somebody read or some talk that somebody gave at an event. Like this is,
Unless it was us.
yeah, well, it sounds, yeah, you work with people like us who've done it before. Because I will tell you this, everything is theoretical until you go out and do it. Like if you've never driven a car, the idea of driving a car is theoretical.
Yeah.
Then you go out and you do it and you get your hands on the wheel and you turn the ignition on or push the button depending on how old your car is, and you put it into gear and hit the skinny pedal to get it to start moving. And then you're like, ooh, wow, there's more theory to this. There's actually something I've learned. I put this into practice. It's become practical. And I don't care if it's building with Legos, building organizations, or driving a car. Everything is theoretical until you put it into practice. If any of this stuff sounds like theoretical bullshit, go put it into practice and you'll figure it out. Excuse me. I just went on my rant.
Yeah, that's right. So I want to just come back to this idea of if you hire more salespeople, you will double your sales team, double your revenue, or double your sales income, and that's not necessarily true for all of the reasons that have been mentioned. But I also think it's important to understand that when you have a small sales team, you tend to have a bunch of what I like to call cowboys who kind of rope and ride and do everything. And there's kind of this chaotic sense in a small sales team, which is fine as you're starting to build things out and figure out what's happening. But as you add people, you also add chaos, and you can't scale chaos. There's no way to scale chaos. What you can scale is process and systems. So the more people you have in the sales organization, the more process and system and order and reinforcement you have to have. You can't just keep adding people and think that it's going to get better without making the system that supports them better also. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, and you can add, but you're going to waste a lot of money, and you're going to get yourself into the same situation that many organizations got into in this grow at all cost model, where they took somebody's metrics that said, hey, you know what, you should pay the base salary that you should pay your rep is 10% of their quota, the amount that you expect them to bring in. Somebody has that math, or somebody will say that their OTE should be about 20%. There's 5x their OTE is what they should return in the business. So everybody's like, okay, well, let me go out there and find a bunch of 200K sales reps and have them come in and generate $1 million in sales. Good luck.
Yeah, you've got to build a system that supports them, and you've got to understand what will the market support, what are your clients buying, which industries are growing, which industries are shrinking. So as you're adding all of these people, you've really got to understand, what are you doing with them? What do they need to bring with them to be successful? And what are you doing with them? And how long will it take for them to be proficient? How long will it take for them to build the relationships?
This
Again, wait, hang on one second. Again, if you don't know how long your sales cycle is, because you've only measured the very bottom of your sales cycle, you will never know how long it will take for your salespeople to build the relationships, get the information, make the sales that you're expecting them to make. Renee, go.
this is that moment where I do in the podcast where I say engagement matters. What happens with your employees matter. The experience your employees have will the customer experience will never be better than the employee experience. So if you hire those sales reps and you throw them in and they don't have a process or a system to support them, and there's not a good onboarding, and your marketing team is going to be the maddest because they've driven all of these leads and nothing's going to happen, and it's all going to fizzle because you don't have someone who's excited and understands what they're doing and is having a good experience, pass that good experience along to someone else. And it's going to impact all of the numbers for everybody because it's all just going to fall flat. So
now, instead of talking about
ROI to support that good onboarding and everything else, there's a real ROI.
But now, instead of talking about ROI, you're talking about opportunity cost, right? So we're thinking there's an ROI on adding all these salespeople, but we haven't calculated bringing in a bunch of salespeople who aren't yet competent, don't have the resources, aren't able to do their job. They are now communicating with customers that you will never get back.
Never. That's why I say your marketing team is going to be so mad. They've worked so hard to get, whatever through the door. And it's like a revolving door because it's going to go right back out.
A good marketer is going to actually go to their sales counterpart and they're going to say, do not send these specific leads to the newbies.
Right.
Give them the tier 2, tier 3 level leads, because we know these tier 1 leads, based on however we score them, they are expensive leads, and there's very few of those leads, and they're going to convert well. And I want them to go to the experienced sales rep because it impacts my ability, going back an episode, to demonstrate return on marketing investment. And if you blow a quality lead on a junior rep, you're not only snookering the company, you're snookering me in marketing, which means I won't get enough budget to feed you in the future.
Right. Exactly. Any last thoughts before we wrap up this discussion?
I have one to share. I wanted to get into what everybody else was getting into earlier when I said my second point, but I think it's a good one to end on. And that is to know when to hire. So we're all in these budget conversations and we're all doing this fuzzy magic math that Mike just pointed out, like we're just going to hire these people and then magically more money will come in. I think one place where this gets missed often is, what does your current, Liz, you touched on it a little bit. I was waiting to see if you went in more detail when you said, what will the market absorb? Like what's out there for the market, right? And Daryl, you talked about the total addressable market. Like you may have to, it may not be enough. One of the measures that you should be looking at, many people are probably in this budgeting aspect right now, is what does your flow look like right now? Do you have more leads coming in than your salespeople can touch in the time frame that they should be touching them? Right? Like I'll give an example. We pick on A.C.T.S a lot, right? But like I'll just use A.C.T.S as the example. You may have a demo call that you're forcing people to go through. How far out are those demo calls getting scheduled, right? Because if they're more than a few days, like the calendar availability. Now somebody may choose, I'm not going to book this for a month. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about calendar availability for a sales team. If it's getting over a few days, you're losing leads. Right? You're not seeing it in your numbers, but I'm telling you now, human behavior, human psychology, you are losing leads, right? So you need to be looking at what are those metrics? How far out does it take for your people to get into conversations after someone expresses interest? How many people are coming in and don't get talked to within the X amount of time? And you should determine what that time is. And it's always faster than what you think it is, right? Like, I will tell you, HubSpot did research that said if you got to somebody within 2 to 5 minutes of them filling out a form, that your close rate is much, much higher, right? So like it's always faster than what you think it is. So your own numbers can give you an idea of when you should hire. And that goes to that kind of smart process that you can be doing too, because if you're budgeting growth throughout the year, you're budgeting more leads, you don't throw as to Mike's point, all 5 of those reps in on the same day and like, oh, they're magically going to get, you can only absorb so much at one time, not only because of the change management but what your market and your leads are doing. So if you budget throughout the year for them to start, then internally all of that process goes much better, and you're kind of matching to your growth trajectory.
So I want to just add one thing to that, and then I want to hear what Mike is thinking over here. One of the ways that you waste leads is by overestimating how many active leads a salesperson can manage. And what will happen is they can't, further down in the funnel, when they can't do the funnel follow up, when they can't keep track of everything that's in the funnel, they're too busy to do the work of putting everything into the CRM. What happens is stuff falls out of the funnel just because nobody bothered. Nobody bothered to follow up 3 months later when they said they would be ready to talk. Nobody, while they were talking to your competitors, nobody was checking in to make sure there was a next step that was needing to happen. So overestimating how much work it takes to get those deals closed is another really good way to waste resources, because you're losing deals because there's too much for the salespeople to do. So understanding both is important. Mike, what you got for us before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think just 2 kind of key themes that came up, just or 2 words that I wrote down while we were talking through it, was one is design. So you can design for the experience that you want to create, whether that's the hiring and onboarding and maybe even everboarding experience, both for your customers and for your team. You can design for that experience, and you can test whether or not the conversions are happening, or you're enabling or empowering people to move through it. The other thing that's really important for everyone to understand is, what are your standards that you have? So standard time for answering that lead form, or booking that demo call, or whatever the standard is that you put in place. And what's your comfort level with risk when you start to have variance outside of that standard? You either are below the standard or above the standard. What's your capacity for risk? And I will say it again, don't do this alone. Work with a team, because everybody's capacity for risk might be a little bit different. Your CFO may have a much higher capacity for risk because they know, based on the money that's coming into the organization, that they have a lot of cash that they're sitting on that they can invest in other areas. If you're not having that conversation, you'll miss an opportunity to invest further. And if you're in a situation where something else is changing, then you might identify that, hey, the reason why some of the other stuff isn't working in the organization is because our capacity for risk is a little bit different. So design, standards, and risk.
All right. Any last thoughts?
Just anecdotal. Something Renee said, if you have too many leads, they're not getting followed up on, and then they die. I hear sales reps often question, why does marketing often have the BDR team, or the SDR team, what have you, call it what you will. That's why. Because if sales can't get to the leads fast enough, then we would have our own inside sales team to do some initial qualification further. Just FYI.
Well, thanks for having this conversation with me, you guys. I think we got a lot of good information about how long it takes. What do you need to keep in mind when you're hiring salespeople, and what that return on investment is for each salesperson, and how long it'll take. My favorite answer is Mike's is, it depends. You just don't know until you start looking at your own organization and how well you're going to support that person. So let's wrap up this segment, and we're going to do a quick episode after this one on how do you change the math? We've been talking a lot about math. What things can we do to make that math look a little bit better? So we'll see you in the next episode. Happy selling, everybody. Okay. You ready?
Ready.
Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. I'm Liz Hyman, and I'm here with your Sales SOS podcast crew, and we have been talking about sales math. What is the math that you need to understand in order to run your organization and your sales team and your marketing team? So we've been talking about this math, and I'm going to say a quote that I said earlier, which is I've heard over and over recently, it doesn't matter how many calls you make. It just matters the quality of the call. That may be true that the quality of the call, in fact, it is true. The quality of the call is super important, but there's still a funnel. There's still math. And we often want to see those numbers look better. We want a better conversion rate in marketing activity, or we want a better close ratio between conversation and close, or we want a higher ratio of the proposals that we send out to close. So if we're looking at this math, or we want our salespeople to onboard faster and have a higher return on investment sooner, if we want to improve some of these numbers, I mean, I just threw a lot out there. This is a 7-day seminar we could be having on this topic. The next year, we will cover all of these topics. But, where do you start? Where do you start with improving the math, the results?
I'll add on this one. I'll jump in. We talked a couple episodes ago about the importance of mapping out a buyer's journey, right? And understanding how long that real cycle is, like not just from talking to close, but what does it take in their mind? When did they start this process and when did they close, right? So looking at it from their perspective. And when you have that mapped out, and we talked in another episode where we talked about some of the activities within that and understanding the ROI of those activities within them, when you kind of map those to the points of where the buyer is along the way, now you can really look at where you see things speed up and where you see things break down. And those make it very easy to start figuring out where to optimize in your revenue machine, right? In your growth machine. Like, where do you dig in and kind of figure out where to optimize? And it gives you some common language across the entire revenue organization. It also gives you some data points, so it's not a complete guess.
So if you're not measuring and you don't have process, all you have is chaos. You can't really figure out where you're optimizing.
Right? And mapping comes even before measuring.
Right. Mike, what you got for us?
Just like when you talk about math, if we just get to the basics, what can we do? We can add things, we can subtract things, we can multiply things, we can divide things, right? Like just basic elementary school math, right? So add, subtract, multiply, divide. Every time you add in a new variable, is that variable, is the thing to the left of the variable a plus sign? Is it a multiplication sign? Is it a subtraction sign? Is it a division sign? If you don't know where it fits, it's going to be really hard to evolve and adjust your math and optimize for the right math inside your organization. So that's what I would add to that piece.
Daryl, what you got for us?
Okay, I'm going to be different. I'm not directly going to make
Wait,
things.
Daryl.
Yeah.
Say that again because you froze up a little bit.
No problem. Sorry. I said I'm going to be different. I'm not going to directly answer the question, but it is related, which is the question is, how do we change the math to make things better? And what I see over and over again, all of us have talked about it over this whole 4-episode series, is this. To change the math, everybody in the leadership role needs to do the following: have agreement and consensus on the assumptions in the math, have agreement and consensus on the key metrics. You can't boil the ocean with 42 metrics. All right. So what are the key 3, 4, 5 metrics you're going to use to measure your progress as you improve? Everybody has to look at the math holistically. In other words, I see this over and over again. Sales will only look at it from a sales point of view and not even give two shits about marketing. Marketing will only look at it from a marketing point of view and not even freaking understand sales. All right. So how do you change the math? Everybody understands the math challenges every leader in their role has. You look at it holistically because you're representing the revenue of the company, not just your team. And then whenever you change the math throughout the year, because you will, for example, I'm going to go hire 6 more reps that we didn't budget for initially because things are going swimmingly, then you can physically come back to those assumptions and say, do they still apply? You can actually understand why one team might be objecting to the change in math because you took the time out to understand their challenges in their math at the beginning of the process. It's about socializing. So getting everybody on board. Call it what you will. Renee, Liz, Mike have all talked about this. And this is what I see not happen and why companies fail over and over and over again. And part of changing the math, this is the biggest part, and people hate this. CEOs hate it, leaders hate it. They hate it either because it makes me insecure, or they hate it because I'm afraid of conflict. Is you need to be able to challenge the math, whether it's my math or your math, respectfully, to drive down and drill out any gremlins, make sure that we're not making assumptions that we're not aware of that are impacting the results of the math. There you go. Long-winded. Apologize.
So I want to jump into that because I think that when I said here, let's change, how do we change the math? We can't change the math and not understand that we have to change the activity.
Yes.
So just because you in your head change the math, you increase the revenue goal, or you cut the number of people, or you added to the number of people, or you whatever it is that you changed in the math, you now have to have system, process, activity that supports that change. So if we want the math to look better, we can't just say we're going to start having a 30% close ratio from proposal to close instead of 20%. You can't just say that. You have to then understand, why do we have a 20% close ratio? How does that stand in the marketplace? What do other companies' close ratios look like? What can we do to improve the close ratios? Well, and where do we start that process? Do we start that up in marketing, where we are more targeted in our activity toward people who are our ideal customers, so that when the leads come to sales, there's fewer leads, but they're better qualified and more ready to close? Like, what levers are you pulling, as Renee was talking about earlier? What levers are you pulling to make this math change? It doesn't just change by itself. Just because you decide you're cutting somebody or adding something doesn't mean, just because you're going to get the salespeople more leads doesn't mean they have the capacity to handle more leads. So how are you changing the formula all the way through? Not just how are you changing the outcome math. Mike, what you got for me? Because you're smiling. I see it.
You'd see it. The nonverbal strikes again. So so a couple of things that came up there. Daryl was talking about don't boil the ocean from a total number of metrics that are out there. We've talked about this in the past. The role reflective model. What's the thing? The metric. So what? Why does it matter? Now what? What are we going to do? And if you can't answer those 3 questions related to a data point that you're tracking, then I would challenge you on your decision making on whether or not that metric is really an important metric. Many times people will implement RevOps into an organization, and the RevOps person will go through a HubSpot certification program, and they'll talk about all of the metrics that need to be in there and all of the different data points that we should be collecting. And the reality is they overcomplicate their system. So take that reflective model and assess the metrics. When you have your metrics, to hit on the point that came up around creating alignment inside the business, start looking at how each of those conversion metrics can be treated as leading indicators for one group and a lagging indicator for another group. And as those metrics come together, now you really force a common language, a common sense of purpose, a common area of focus across those teams that are connected, whether it's demand or acquisition or retention and expansion or fulfillment or operations or whatever they are. And you start to connect those pieces together. That can be the connective tissue inside your organization that will bring this alignment that will ultimately create that opportunity for impact. So again, super complicated as you add more variables, very hard to do. But once it doesn't need to be as complicated as many of us make it.
I mentioned when we kind of went back on setting the math, right? That when we talked about all this magic math, that you just get assigned, that there are going to be a decent number of revenue leaders who are handed numbers and have to just say they're told make it work, right? When you get into this optimization is where you're going to get a lot of help. And again, Mike says, don't feel alone. Daryl says it's team, right? Like you got to work together and figure this out, because whatever one of you does, it's a whole system. It's not marketing, sales, customer success, whatever. It's a whole system. Whatever one of you does will impact the other. But this is the time where you often have to, I will say this, there will be some tweaks that are relatively easy. You tweak your system, you do whatever, right? Like you're going for efficiencies there. Everybody has small places that they can make efficiencies, but a lot of companies have really tweaked that efficiency lever a lot, right? And for the most part, when we get into this optimization, when we're handed magic math, like, sorry, this is just what has to happen this year. We don't want to have layoffs. If we don't want to, if we're going to get the next capital raise, whatever it is, like these numbers we have to hit these numbers. Now you got to get into, how do you solve magic math? You have to do something new. It's not an efficiency play if you are assigned magic math. You sure go do it. It's your responsibility. You got to find that and do that where you can. But you're going to have to do something new, and you need to look at where those conversion numbers in that journey, where you have the most opportunity to improve, and think of new things to try. And this is where that risk tolerance really needs to go up, right? Like you need to be open to doing things together. We pick on SaaS. I'll use the same example. So let's say you require a demo for your SaaS and your calendar availability is really tight, but you've gotten this magic math number and you can't hire somebody in sales. Okay, what's a new thing you can do? Let's do a group call, because you know what happens? Magic happens when customers and prospects get in there together and they start talking about their problems together, and you can lead the conversation and be all of a sudden you could start weaning out the people who aren't ready yet and the people who are ready. And by the way, the people who are ready are going to convince the people who aren't ready yet too. And now you have a cleaner way of getting into sales in that calendar availability that's very precious right now, right? That would be a new thing, but it's very scary for a lot of people. It's a high risk thing all of a sudden, particularly for the sales rep to say, what? You're going to put a group of people together before I ever get to talk to them, right? Like you have to work together. But if you have magic math coming at you, whatever you've done before and tweaks probably isn't going to do it. You're probably going to have to do something new. And that's when that risk tolerance needs to come up and you have to work together.
So I want to kind of add to that, because this magic math, these WAGs, these arbitrary numbers that are handed to a sales team, they're just numbers. And we tend to think it's a strategy. Here's your number, go. And in order to hit a number, you need both strategy and tactics. And that is what, Mike and Daryl and Renee have been talking about, is the whole team. That goes up to the highest levels in the organization. If we are going to do this, what are we going to do differently? What are we going to stop doing when we start doing this new thing? What are we again, which verticals are we going to look at? Which markets are we going to look at? Which buyers are we going to work out differently? Which tools are we going to use? Which channels are we going to, like, all of those things play into your strategy. How are you getting there? And then you can start looking at the actual tactics of doing it. But to just throw a number at your sales team and say, go with the resources that you have, doing what you've always been doing. Yeah, sales leader, you just figure it out. Doesn't make sense. Because what will happen is your sales team will then be focused on revenue. And those sales, that revenue may have no strategic relevance to where you're trying to take the company. It will hit your sales number this year, may get you your funding, but you may have all the wrong clients. I had a client who literally had a year of funding. He did not have to sell anything for a year, because he was trying to build this entire infrastructure. Instead of doing that, he wanted to look really good to investors. So he went out and he sold to the wrong client because they were easy to sell to. And he built an entire product to match that client because they were easy to sell to, and that would bring him revenue. But it completely undermined his effort toward his larger goal. You can't just say, go sell, because salespeople will sell the easiest, fastest thing they can sell. They will not sell what is strategically relevant. So when you throw a number at somebody and leave it at that, you're making a mistake. Figuring out how you will hit those revenue numbers is a high-level decision. Go, Daryl.
You've inspired me, Liz. And you prompted something I should have said a long time ago. I'm going to state if any sales leader here, I'm going to state the obvious. But it's amazing how often I don't say this, which is, the question was, how do we change the math? How do we, make sure that we support the math? Maybe another way of looking at it, to achieve the goals. The math is there to achieve the goals, right? So that's the objective in the end. Once you agree on what the math is, what the assumptions are, what the performance, the projected, anticipated return on investment should be, it's imperative that you financially reward the contributors, your staff, reps, marketers, etc., that you make sure that their compensation plan is structured to drive that outcome. Not just sales reps have bonuses. Marketers should too. And so if it's all about, for example, we've heard us talked about before, we want to increase the sales velocity from maybe a 4-month cycle to a 3-month cycle, and there should be MBO, management by objectives, in there to reward them once that's hit. All right. You want to make sure that human behavior supports the attainment of the math. And that's critical, because if you just sit there expecting I'm going to pay a flat salary, for example, if it's a marketing team, nothing's going to change. Where's the incentive? That's uncomfortable. Change is hard, right? Sales is the same way. We talked about this already. If I'm rewarded more to do customer renewals than I am to do new sales, I'm going to go to renewals, even though the math is around new sales. So you got to change the compensation to support the math.
I would say it's even more critical in the sales environment, simply because of the mindset of people that enter sales.
Yep.
Many of them view themselves as entrepreneurs, right? They're like a little business inside of a business, and their book of business is their book, right? And to your point, they're literally going to run their business. If you just look at it like that, right? They're going to run their business the best way. And if running their business the best way means they make more money on new sales, not upsells, or upsells, not new sales, or whatever, and that's not aligned with the goals of your business, you got a problem. Yep. Right? Like, and they're doing what they're supposed to do. You have to make that alignment work, because that's who you're attracting, and that's what you want in sales. I mean, it to some extent, it definitely is for marketers too, but because of commission-based sales attracts far more personalities that view it as entrepreneurial.
Yeah, I think that's a cultural shift we need to make in marketing. Too many marketers are just, happy to schedule the email and press send and clock out at the end of the day. Whether that email converts or not, they did their job. And at the end of the day, it's marketing leadership is truly held accountable for results, the ROI we talked about previously. So if marketers aren't thinking like sales reps, then we've got the wrong marketing team. I agree, sales reps are more inclined to change their behavior because that's their DNA. But we do need to get marketers to think more like, if I do this, am I driving revenue?
Well, remember that a salesperson is compensated only on what they sell, most
Correct.
cases, or they have some compensation, and then the rest of their revenue, the rest of their income is based on what they sell. And I think it's really hard, and we could have a whole conversation, talk about this, a whole set of episodes about this. What is the day in the life of a salesperson? And what is it that motivates them to do the things that they do? And if you put yourself in their shoes and you think about the fact that the only other person in the company whose income depends on sales is the CEO or the owner, and maybe not the CEO, maybe it's just the owner, depending upon how the compensation structure, every single day, that salesperson, whether they eat next month or not, depends on what they sold. So they're driven. We drive their behavior based upon how we compensate them. So we need to make sure we compensate them in a way that drives the behavior we want.
100%. Yeah.
Agreed.
All right, Mike, you got one more thing?
Yeah. Ask your team just a simple question. How do you execute? Like anybody that's on the team, how do you execute? And see what their response is. Some may have no idea what you're talking about, and they are going to need to ask a couple of questions. Some might just go do the work, and they create chaos because they do the work differently every time with everybody else, and then engage with multiple people inside the organization. And some actually know how to, know what the difference is between strategy and tactics, know how to create alignment so that the tactics align with the strategy, which ultimately aligns with the goal. But ask your team, how do you execute? And sit back and listen to the answer. And then it will reveal where you should put time, energy, and attention to help them achieve the goals that they're looking for, and which should ultimately help you achieve the goals that you're looking for, which ultimately should help the organization achieve the goals that it's looking for, if all of that alignment is in place. So those are just two words that came up in the conversation that I think were pretty important: execution and alignment.
Liz, can I leave us with one thought too? Because this is another one that I feel really, really strongly about. If we need to improve the math, change the math, do anything, there is one thing you can do universally that will drive the best return, in my opinion. And that is to increase sales and marketing literacy across your entire organization.
Yep.
Because when you do, to the points we've made earlier about don't fail alone, this is a team effort, this is across the entire growth strategy of the company, there are people inside every organization that have a stronghold over a piece or part. And if they don't understand, and that's not necessarily bad, right? Like, because they're owning their area and they're doing a really good job at it, possibly. But if they don't understand marketing and sales, they can't contribute into whatever you're trying to change, whatever math you're trying to improve. When they do, you move it from this downstream activity to more upstream, because they bring these changes in, and it is like magic. And marketing and sales literacy is a problem across organizations. It's from startup to enterprise and all the way in between. It is a problem.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, all of you, for the Sales SOS podcast. Thanks to the sales crew for your great insights. And we will see you, if you're here with us live, next month, same time, same place, same bat time, same bat channel. I don't know if any of you remember that. And I think next time we're going to be talking about planning for the new year. It's probably late for that conversation. It should probably happen earlier, but that's what we're going to dive into next time. I hope you'll join us. Okay. Thanks, everybody who joined us live. And I will talk to you guys all soon.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.